what really speaks is like what is the message you're sending? And I think that has to come from the heart. And the best stuff I wrote was when I was actually in pain or anger or
Mm.
inspiration. So like feeling strong emotions, definitely like if you can channel what you're experiencing in life through curation, through storytelling, I think that's a win. I am excited to be on your show, and I'm excited to be the first guest who's appearing live.
Yeah, it's the first time. I think it will add another layer to the conversation, right? I mean, Twitter spaces are nice, but it's good to see, face to face, especially in this space where we have, everything is like looking at artwork, looking at Twitter, but it's not very common to see people, right? I think that's something I'm looking forward to, get to talk to people every week, but also see their faces. Very, very excited about that. And Alex, you just came back from Korea. Right? You were at NFT Korea. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because I saw your blog post and it sounded very, very exciting. How was that trip?
Yeah. So the blog post can be found on Joyn. It's called Seoul 2023 Arts and Blockchain Week. And I was inspired. I think that after traveling for the last 2 years across the world to different conferences in US and Europe, this was a very refreshing experience because I got a chance to meet many new artists and many new project founders and people working on interesting new solutions. It was both the art week there and the blockchain week. So you had a chance to go to fairs like CADAF, which was originally established with a focus on Korean galleries, and also Frieze, which is rather new. And so about 90% is international galleries and about 10% more or less strong also local galleries showcasing both local and international artists. At the same time, I was invited for NFT Seoul, hosted by Art Token at the COEX Center, the same center that hosts later Frieze. And the same time, I was connected with Crypto Art Cell for their inaugural conference. So it was a chance to exchange so many ideas and talk about some of the issues that this ecosystem is facing. Had a chance to meet many Korean artists, including DK, and see his show. At the same time, there were many openings at independent galleries like Choi Choi or Uncommon Gallery had an AI exhibition. So the week just flew by in a second, and I wanted to commemorate it with sort of my blog that featured both sort of on-chain assets, images behind the scenes, quotes, links to some of the articles that were published in local news about the sort of talks that we were having, and make it more immortal, the experience.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And the first question I had, because you have been to so many events. I think I've been to a couple, and you're always there. You are very well prepared, right? You don't miss like the important talks. You are also part of many panels and many of the side parties, the side events. So I was wondering, when you compare the events you have been to in Europe and America to this event that happened in Asia, did you find like similarities and differences? Is there something that stands out from how things are run in Asia compared to Europe or America? What are your thoughts?
Oof, that's a tough one. I think overall, it's a very professional approach. Um, in Korea, technology is obviously a very big focus. As my hosts were joking, it's sort of the Samsung era right now. So it's the Samsung dynasty because they sort of like overrule so many different things. So one of the most major art museums is run by Samsung. Some of the major galleries,
Mm.
every event you would attend to had sort of like these translation devices. So the speakers were presenting in both Korean and English, but you could understand both. So it would switch to English or Korean, the opposite depending on the. And I attended three different talks. So one was the NFT sale, crypto art sale, and then the Frieze talks, and they all had that. And I found it incredible to hear from professionals that didn't have to have sort of that language barrier switching to a foreign language, talk about the local scene in a way that was easily understandable, even with the translation, and the translators were going real time. And then I think from like a more subtle and fun angle, something that my Korean friends pointed out is all the events have food. So food is a very big deal.
Mm.
So throughout the trip, they would always take us to experience the local cuisine, but also every single event had a very creative sort of like dish they were serving, which made it kind of like more personal and special. I think the quality of the screens, I was in awe. So one of the events that was both of the conferences I spoke at had massive LED displays, but also Crypto Art Cell was hosted in Lightroom, which is a location for immersive events. So the screen was like 3 floors high.
Wow.
And that was very impressive, especially for experiencing digital art. It feels like the city is sort of like native to welcome. And obviously they are. They have some of the most pioneering digital artists. They have Namjoon Paik Museum, who was one of the sort of like the grandfathers of video art. So it's almost like it was meant to be this confluence of arts and tech there.
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, that speaks very well about the organization of those events. I mean, if you think about it, having translation, it's a big deal, right? It's not easy to set up translation, real time translation. And I think that makes a lot of sense because I've been to events in France, in Spain, where English is not the native language, also in Mexico, and the main language is English, right? But the people that are from those communities, those cities, are probably, I mean, it's not their native language, so it's harder for the whole space to get to the locals. Let's call it that way. So I think it's very smart thing. I wonder if we will see more of that. Do you think so? How was I mean, the reaction from the audience to this sort of translation and what do you think? You think that will be copied and replicated across the upcoming events?
I sure hope so. You do have to have professional translators because the topics we're talking about, especially blockchain, can be a little bit complex.
Mm.
And for someone to real time translate it in an understandable way is quite impressive. I do think language barrier plays a very big role right now. I mean, most of the platforms we see are in English. And I talk to many artists on a day-to-day basis, and with some of them, we have to just use Google Translate for our conversations. But I think more and more accessibility will bring bigger diversity into the
Mm.
space. So I sure hope so that this will be introduced, especially for recordings from these panels, because obviously there's a limited amount of people that can attend. But it would be, I think it would be worth having some professional material translated online. So I hope
Mm.
there will be more work done towards this.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And not only for events, I think in general, right? When we think about NFTs, when we think about digital art, generative art, AI art, if you don't speak English and you aren't confident or you can understand it well, it could be super complicated. The entry barrier is even higher, right? So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just to finish the event side, and I'm asking you about this because I've seen, as I said before, I've seen you in many events previously. So I was wondering, Alex, from the past 2 3 years, which events in your mind were very, for whatever reason, you think those are like the ones people need to go and see in years to come? Which event really like push the boundaries and put like a high bar in general in terms of digital art? Could be NFTs in general, right? Doesn't need to be art. So in general, NFTs, which events would you recommend people to assist to go to in the future?
Oof, this is a very tough question. I think you have to understand what is your goal. So if I'm a collector and I want to discover new art, or if I'm someone working in a gallery and I want to see examples of installations and best curatorial practices, or I'm an artist looking to break in, it might be a different example. I think It is important for people to understand where sort of like the base lies. So Ars Electronica was one of the pioneering fairs for arts and technology, and even though their narrative has sort of it's not directly in line with the space that we are in, I think the history and the curatorial direction that they overtook over the years and is funded by the European Union has been quite impressive. And I'm a little bit biased, obviously, because I worked with them for a couple of years on curation, but at the same time, I think from the sort of new experiences, it's often about the opportunities to network, especially if you're an artist or builder in this space. So, what are the chances you would be able to have conversations with people you're attending to see? And I think conferences that are already established in size might be great for you to get a glimpse of someone's lecture and then try to follow up with them. But I noticed experiences that are a little bit more secluded is where you get a chance to really connect. So since Seoul was such a distant destination, I was able to have conversations with people that in New York or London, I doubt I would have had access to because they're usually so busy with being pulled around. Similar like NFT show Europe, we were a little bit more secluded,
Mm.
and art was one of the many directions. I think it's very challenging for conferences to try and be everything at once. So I think conferences that have a very strong identity of what they are, like are they a media experience? Are they there for educational talks? Are they bridging connections between people? Are those that really manage to deliver for all the attendees on that mission?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, the exciting thing is that there are so many events that slowly we are seeing events that seem to be going to, continue to, let's call it, operate over the years, right? There are like yearly events, if we think about those that people are traveling to, but there are also galleries, right? Shows, smaller shows that are probably targeting the local scene. And I had a question about that, Alex, because I know you live in London, and it seems like there are many things happening in terms of art in London. And I was wondering how I mean you live there. How important or how many um, let's say events or how many opportunities just because you're living in such a city with so many things happening in terms of art has opened the doors for you. Would you recommend somebody that is taking this path serious and being involved in the art world? Would you recommend them to think about moving to a city that you can find events, that you can find things happening on a week to week basis, or you think it's more digital these days? What are your thoughts
Honestly, I think I don't think necessarily location matters that much. So my work has mostly been online. I've been working sort of online since, I guess, 2015, 16, where most of the connections happened internationally by just traveling to the locations where something is happening. I think London is definitely a capital, one of the capitals for culture, but in terms of our digital art world, it still sort of has a lot more room to grow. If I compare to LA, if I compare to New York, even to Paris, we don't have sort of that centralized hub around which the community connects because London itself, it's sort of the identity is very mixed, people from all over the world, and we have certain organizations that sort of I'm a part of London Leading Web3 that we stick together and we sort of like organize host events and we try to bring more inclusivity. We obviously have Proof of People happened last year. Through like 2 3 years back, we launched NFT London as a community effort, and then NFT NYC came and launched NFT London. So that just shows that it was actually someone from like the team from US came and launched NFT London on a bigger
there?
scale. So it just shows that right now, I wouldn't say there's sort of like that center that pulls all of us together. There's room to grow. And I think living absolutely anywhere, if you have the opportunity to, you'll save money because London is very difficult to sort of live. Like I've lived here for 13 years. It's my home. Obviously, I can't move to Ukraine right now. So I'm stuck here. But it has been becoming more and more difficult. And I know many people live in more remote locations. They save a lot of money on rent, but they travel to conferences and they meet more people than I do because they're just, they use that money to travel. And I think when you travel and you meet at specific events, for example, if you're into generative art, you go to Marfa. If you're more into DeFi, you go to sort of like ECC in Paris, or you would go to Singapore, and then that's where you really meet people that are in your line of work, and then you just continue building those relationships online. That's where most of the meetings happen.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you tell us a bit, Alex, how did you get involved in the art world? Because I know you have been doing things related to art from a long time before Web3 started, the whole digital art, let's call it revolution started. So how you were someone that was already involved in the art world? Can you tell us how that started and what were your first steps in the as an art professional?
That's a long story. I mean, art was always big in our family. My dad would go and like support emerging artists from university, like, a couple $100 to buy a piece or help them like create a piece. So I grew up around studios. And in university, I thought that economics and politics is a good degree. But by the end of my studies, I was missing creativity. So I wrote my dissertation on photography
Mhm.
and how photography can be used to influence social change. So the image, the context, propaganda, all of these different things I studied, and I was fascinated how the dissemination of content can have such an impact on a society. And ever since then, I sort of worked towards being able to get a master's degree. And I picked Sotheby's because it felt like the best way to switch my career from something more structured, like consulting, into a world of art and business. I didn't want to study art history. To me, I wanted to be part of the change. I saw how music sort of changed. I saw how books were changed by Amazon. And I really thought there's room for technology to influence change in art. And quickly after my master's, after trying myself in the art world, I realized I want to work in a place where I can be agile, where there's room for growth, and where we're solving problems. We're not just reinstating the existing gatekeeping practices. And so it was 2016 that I got an opportunity to join literally like a team of two people with a couple of consultants, which
Mhm.
was Dot Arts at the time. And
Mhm.
they purchased the rights to essentially issue to the market Dot Art domain names. So the same way as there's .com and .org, we were bringing to the market .art, and we had to first price the English language to understand what would contemporary .art or business .art be priced as. And then I was quickly sort of exposed to different areas of the art world, beginning with sort of like deviant art creators to museum directors to influencers to Kickstarter, like to absolutely all the different aspects. I had a series of interviews with old master dealers, or I'd have interviews with contemporary gallery owners. And through this experience over the years, I spent 5 years there. I've gained an understanding what are some of the challenges for different areas of the art world to go more digital, to strengthen their digital presence. And essentially, my job was to work through their issues in the industry they are and see how can being more present online, being more digital savvy solve that. And throughout these years, naturally, digital artists were those that understood digital the most. So we, like the company and the founder, made the wise decision to support that direction. And we were the first sort of to sponsor the Contemporary and Digital Art Fair in 2017 that took place in New York, CADAF. And
Mhm.
that's when the Winklevoss twins bought their CryptoPunks, and that's where a lot of history started sort of ramping up. And after that, sort of we continued to support Rhizome's 7-on-7 conference, which was another conference combining technologists and artists. Then we started a partnership with Arts Electronica. We issued Digital Innovation and Arts Awards. And as the head of partnerships, I oversaw many of these initiatives, and I was directly involved working like talking to Raphael Rosendahl at one of the events, sort of learning from him, or speaking to like Jiffy co-founders and seeing what is happening in the industry, how is it ramping up. And it wasn't until 2019 where blockchain started being on the radar. I remember it was my friend's secret Santa party that we were thinking what to give his boss, and we bought something on Rarible, and we gifted the key as a present, like the yeah, to claim the Ethereum wallet to claim the gift. I don't think that person got that, but I'm sure he was showing off later when the NFT boom happened that he had an NFT
Yeah,
since 2019. But sort
there
of
are
that was
many stories. There are many
yeah.
stories like that. Yeah, nice, nice.
And that was sort of like so that happened, and then maybe it was like 2020 I minted my own piece just to like understand how it works, and then slowly I started being invited for all these different talks. Like I think it was 2020 when I gave my first talk about blockchain and NFTs, and then 2021 things just blew up.
Yeah, blew up. Right, that's super exciting path. I mean, I have multiple questions now, but let me start. This is something that I had a guest, Francisco Farr, and I think it was the second episode, and we were chatting about having a career in art and the education part. And he was telling us his perspective on how it helped him. He went to Harvard, and he had the chance to do his thesis with a very popular architect. So in your case, Alex, I mean, you went to Sotheby, and this was many years ago. And in this case, you're not really. I mean, you have created art, right? We will talk about that, but you are doing other things, right? You are leading partnerships. You're also curating shows. So for those that are interested in doing something in the art world, how 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 relevant or how much did you learn? Will you say it's worth it to go to one of these masters or one of these schools to learn about art and to be a professional art? uh, Yeah, to be in this profession. Do you think that helped you? What was your experience with Sotheby's and what you learned there?
That's a tough question. I think any masters, first and foremost, you're going for the network. Let's be honest, and I think people sort of in a lot of people studying with me, they had greater access to opportunities than I had. And many of them went down the traditional route of having a gallery or working for a big gallery or working for an auction house. And this was the lifestyle that felt stable. I think for me, it was really good to understand systematically how things work because I think it sort of gives me a foundation to understand bigger processes, especially when people are like opening different platforms and they don't have previous art business experience. They can run into some issues that over the centuries were already, tested. But at the same time, I think I had enough of a flexible mind, when you sort of like grow up at the fall of the Soviet Union and you had the whole system changes and
Yeah.
you're in this like entrepreneurial revolutionary mindset. So I was ready to take what I learned and break it and be ready to adapt. And I think anyone with that mindset has to understand that what they teach you and real life is very different. Like the number one lesson they taught us was artists don't sell through auctions on primary market. And the number one selling model for all of the marketplaces right now is an auction model. So like what are we doing? We're inflating prices for artists which are unsustainable over the long run. But you can make the most money from a single piece, you know? So all of these different failures over time that they taught us, and then I'm looking at this and I'm like, wait, this is not how it's supposed to be. And the answer is somewhere in between. So I think for me, it kind of like worked out because it served as my moral compass over the years, to sort of like be like, okay, I know that this is how it's done. This is our assumption. Let's test it out. I'm not sure if right now, for someone who wants to work in the sort of like in the art world, if you can afford to take a year of your life and you really want to change your career, it's great. But if you want to work in Web3 and like with sort of digital arts, it's very different because we're at the end of the day, most of the artists that are very successful right now, they wouldn't be represented by a gallery 5 years ago. this like sort of like this is a new wave of culture, and I'm afraid a lot of people who come from that traditional background, they still fail to understand how sort of like some things work, and they still try to apply only the old principles without embracing the new principles. And I think the answer has to always be somewhere in between. You have to understand both worlds if you want to be that bridge, not just one of them.
Mm. Yeah, that's very insightful. And what would you say is the main difference? Alex, you mentioned, I mean, your example was great about the auctions, which is the Dutch auctions, right? And I mean, just having 1,000 pieces series is crazy. We think about the traditional art world when we see what we can do with generative art and this algorithm creating thousands of pieces, and then all of those going through a Dutch auction. Yeah, I can see how that's not happening in the traditional art world. But be, besides that, what would you say is the biggest challenge for those that are in the traditional art world and they are breaking into this digital space? What is the biggest, the most challenging part of doing that?
I think I don't know how politically correct I should be. Well,
Mm.
okay. The most basic,
No.
I think, challenge is being being an extrovert.
Mm.
I We're still early. This is going to change. Artists will be represented, but at least in the last 2 years, it was all about your digital presence. So that's number one. And I think a lot of artists just couldn't be bothered to be
Mm.
socially active. So this is one of the things. The second thing is there were different metrics that determined the value of a certain piece. And I feel like with NFTs over the last several years at least, it was heavily about the first impression, especially how viral, how quickly it captures attention, how new it is. So visual components played an extremely big role. And it took us like what, 2 years to start contextualizing some of this art, and especially when you see what's happening on art blocks with the new releases, they're working harder and harder towards more complex works that might not just have like a nice visual appearance. And the but that what's great about it is that the collectors also are growing.
Mm.
They're more educated. They started reading more about art. They started learning more about art. If you look at LeRandom, right? Like it started as collecting NBA Top Shot. Now it's a whole sort of like educational body for digital arts and generative arts. So I think the collectors and the artists are growing together, and that's beautiful. But we can't just say that the words dank or memes don't exist, because this was sort of what started this whole run. And I think people that just come into the space to suck liquidity out of it and just sell as much as possible is not the actors that are going to bring this to too far. I think
Mm.
we need more actors that are interested in artist representation long term. For example, what Artxcode is doing, they're not just consigning artists for a drop. They're actually representing artists, and that's a very different dynamic. Because when you're being consigned for a drop, you sell as much as possible and then you say bye. But when you sort of like represent, you are vested in the long-term success of the artist. And some of the biggest sort of like agents for artists actually get paid by the artists instead of taking a commission from sale,
Mm.
because that's another incentive to sort of like to have them grow and deliver rather than have a one-off success. So just a couple thoughts.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You know, you mentioned um, that you were curating some shows. I think this was before the digital revolution. Let's call it that way. But you also have been curating shows these days, right? Recently, you had a show in New York with Bitforms Gallery, and I mean, let's first um, learn a bit about your experience and how did you got in touch with Bitforms and how was the experience of curating a show like that? I was there and it was great. I think it was next to the signing of Dmitri Cherniak book. Um,
Yeah, the signing happened at the show.
at the show. Okay, so how was that experience, Alex? Did they get in touch with you? Have you worked with them previously? And how did you select the artist? How did you select the artist? And how was it all about? And how long did it take? Too many questions.
No, it's beautiful. So I actually know the gallery for a long time. It's been like 7 years. It was when we were hosting at the new museum in New York in 2017. I was leading a project where that art supported the arts and technologists collaboration, where artists had to, over a period of 3 months, work with technologists on creating something new. So Adi Wagenknecht was there, Cindy Gallup, Mike Taika, and Zach Kaplan was the director of Rhizome. Michael O'Connor was the creative director. So all these different people, which are quite OGs, were all part of that project. And I was also doing interviews with all these different artists. And at the time, that's where I met Steve. And I introduced him to some of our other partners, like the director of Multimedia Museum in Moscow. And sort of like it was just like a gathering of people that are also like interested in the same things. And I think over all these years, we continue to foster conversations about the space and everything that's happening. And it wasn't until last year that I saw one museum hosting an all-male show, and I just wrote the blog about I wanted to highlight women artists working with code, and I wrote an article highlighting, I think started with like 20, and then everyone left comments, so I started increasing my list, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like a list of artists now. And that sort of like pushed it was quite, it went a little bit viral, the text. And so I was approached by many different people who wanted to work on projects that highlight sort of like women working with code. And so that's where it really was born. That sort of like Bitforms was one of the galleries, and we continued to have conversations for another several months about the idea, the artists, and it was probably 3 months before the show took place, that we're like, okay, we're doing this. And I wanted it to be small, and I wanted it to be one-on-ones exactly because of that, I think, oversupply problem that we're facing right now. So I wanted it to be not about sales, but about the focus. And the gallery graciously said, like, okay, we can do that. And so it was sort of like it was, I think it was like mostly sold out anyway. The works were just of very like higher quality, and each artist highlighted sort of the work they do with AI and codes, but in their own way, because I wanted to bring that diversity of medium and practice within AI to show people that it's not just the buzzwords. There's actually like a whole world, happening of interesting things. And so we had this like almost historical tool sets from starting from Helena Sarin, who
Mm-hmm.
her and I think Leah were like one of the earliest pioneers, and then we had Sarah Ridgley, Sarah Ludy. I also loved we had an interactive piece, Sarah Friend's piece. So everyone that was like the most popular piece because it was interactive. We had Maya's work. It was just such a great and diverse and interactive experience, and I wouldn't change the lineup or add or subtract anyone. Like we've approached, I think only sort of like two artists that sort of like we were not able to consign because it was a bit short notice. But I'm happy that things worked out exactly how they did. It was sort of like meant to be. And in the gallery space, it was perfect balance of works. And so the show lasted for 2 months. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think any show these days lasts longer than like a week or two. And this was for 2 months. So honestly, for a curator, with my mission to what I want to bring to the world and to this space, it was a dream come true. And I'm forever grateful to Bitforms for contextualizing the arts and the history and the narratives of all these works. And they were thankful to me because they were like, this is the biggest turnout we've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and
Yeah.
also the closing coincided with NFT NYC week. So
Right.
we hosted two events. Like one was like a live reading and just like artist tour, and the second was the book signing because Helena's piece was in the show, so it kind of makes sense. And there
Mm.
was like a line outside of people getting
Yeah, I
into
was there.
the
I was there. It took me like 40 minutes
show.
to
Yeah,
get
like
to the
it was
book.
crazy. And seeing Manfred Mohr come in and just like say hi to everyone. I mean, I have this like slide on Instagram and it's just like all the legends coming in and being so excited. We had like Beeple come in and play around with Anna Maria's piece because it was interactive. You could leave your own prompt, and then we created like a collaborative piece of all these different prompts that people left. So he came in, we did like a tour, and then some like other famous artists would come by, just people visiting with their kids. Kids would leave prompts, and I really loved the fact that people were able to communicate with the show and connect with it in a meaningful way.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. And by the way, a reminder to anyone that's listening right now, the live stream, but also in the podcast, all these collections, all these artists will be added to the description. So if you're looking for some of these artists or some of these collections, you can check the description of the episode and you will find it. And Alex, that's quite interesting. I mean, it all started from an article you wrote, right? That's basically how it got started. And the, what advice would you give people? Because I've seen many people interested in curating, right? It could be artists, it could be collectors. How can they get started? What's your experience? What would you tell them? How to get started curating anything?
Um, I get asked this quite a bit, and I'll be honest with you. My goal was not really to sort of like to be known as a curator or anything. It was to realize that burning vision inside that I wanted to let out. And so I didn't care. I was like writing articles I started a blog and I would just write articles highlighting artists for like 5 years and no one probably even read it, like random internet strangers. But that was my outlet. So I think it's about finding your outlet, finding your channel. So to me at the time, it was my blog
Mhm.
because I strongly believe in owning your digital property. Like that's gonna stick in my head after that art forever. But it's true. The only thing you really own is your own space on the internet.
Mhm.
Like I extend my domain by many years because it's mine and it's not like it's the last thing that will fail on the internet is your own sort of website. Because all these social media platforms are great, but don't get too reliant on them. Like there's a new one every day. So Callo, I really like well done for having your own newsletter and
Yeah,
producing
the
content.
emails. The emails. I mean, you mentioned the blog. That's very important. You own your domain, but also emails, right? It's good because it's a direct contact with your audience, and if they subscribe, that means they want to be part of your journey, and they can always unsubscribe. They want to. So yeah, you make a very important point about owning your content. It's sorry, it's not only the art, right? It's the content you produce, and yeah, that's a
Yeah, it's
great
like an
topic.
argument of being on chain.
Hmm.
Like make sure this stuff doesn't disappear at some point. But anyway, coming back to giving actual people advice rather than ranting here, find your channel. And the reason I joined Joyn is actually because we shared that same vision of empowering creators. So at first, my role was to support with finding opportunities for open calls. And
Hmm.
that's how we empowered artists. We would bring these opportunities for them to participate in. But on the other hand, we were also empowering curators of those open calls because we made their life easier by being able to manage hundreds of submissions. But now, what sort of we noticed over the last several months is that it's great you have all this content, but what do you do with it? And we noticed that a lot of people sort of they do an open call with us, and then they sort of try to figure out what to do with it, how to showcase it. So we built internal tools for showcases, for stories like you published. And honestly, I feel like that's an amazing way for someone to get started with curation because you make an open call, then you highlight artists. So we're seeing Eric Paul Rhodes is doing his every Friday. Um, we see a lot of artists just independently beginning to write and highlight. And I think the best part is when I was writing my own blog, uploading images with links was such a pain
Hmm.
that like now I'm just like dropping a link to an NFT and it just shows and
Yeah,
it's
that's
great.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I used it for the blog about Seoul. Like I think I highlighted like 30 works and I just dropped the link. I didn't have to like upload the image and add links to the artists, the names and so again, if you want to curate, talk to me. If you want to do it through Join or also like I see a lot of people just using Twitter as their base because at the end of the day, it's about what do you have to say. It's I don't think it's about, if you were invited to curate for the National Gallery or if you were invited to sort of do a group show in someone's basement. What really speaks is like what is the message you're sending? And I think that has to come from the heart. And the best stuff I wrote was when I was actually in pain or anger or
Mm.
inspiration. So like feeling strong emotions, definitely like if you can channel what you're experiencing in life through curation, through storytelling, I think that's a win because a lot of things sort of I did was non-commercial. And I continue to a little bit feel uncomfortable curating commercial shows because
Mm.
that's not really a curator's job. That's an art dealer's job. I think
What do
I
you mean commercial? Commercial shows are those where the pieces are up for sale. Is that right?
yeah, yeah. So I think that we are living in a new era of curator and arts dealer in our
Mm.
space. And that's what literally probably will save me if I want to continue doing what I do is getting
Hmm.
paid. But before I had this weird thing like I don't want to be, paid by the artist or something, but now what and again what sort of we use for showcases it's about you put a small percentage fee and if something sells through your curation you receive a percent, so this is kind of like an organic combination where
Hmm.
curators are rewarded for sort of like spending their time investing their energy and soul into this curation and then artists sort of like rewards the curators for doing that through splitting the fees. So I think what we build at Join makes it much, much easier because you curate artworks, not artists. So artists don't have to be sort of like fixated in your curation. They can list, they don't have to list, and also you're not dependent on anyone. You can still show works that you don't own or the artist didn't sort of list. You're not gonna get paid. But you can mix and match. So I think offering that flexibility is something that we sort of like aimed for. And it gives you a level of independence. So I noticed sort of you do your blind gallery, and that's sort of like also a wonderful way for artist discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Join has been. I'm very, very happy with the features that Join has created for us. I mean, my example with the blind gallery, it helped us to do open calls. In this case, was to select or to get participants, so artists that wanted to be in the blind gallery, and then the blind gallery club voted and kind of curated the artists that they wanted to be in the edition, in the exhibition. Of course, it was blind, the concept, but yeah, Join made it super easy for us to run such an open call. And now with the new features, I think it's a great way to, as you said, write about the artist, write about the exhibition with, I mean, that embedding the pieces directly into the platform is super helpful. It super feels very native, both as a writer but also as a reader or the spectator or the collector, because they can find the pieces with one click. They can buy it right there in the spot. So yeah, Join, for those listening, I really recommend checking out Join as an artist if you want to participate in some of these open calls, some of these exhibitions, but also as a collector or, as Alex you said, as a content creator. Could be your outlet, she described, and could be your first experience with curating shows. And I think it's a very straightforward process, right? It's not as you can pick artists and art that's already created, right? You don't need the permission from the artist. Only by can you explain a bit that process, Alex, of the selling? I think they need to accept the piece to be sold. Is that or listed? Am I right? The listing part is where they need the permission, right?
Yes. So basically, as a curator, you select any artwork that's available out there on any platform, whether on Joyn or other marketplace, and you're able to add it to your curation. And they don't have to be listed for sale. So if you can just import a gallery, add text, add supporting images or videos, and just talk about these NFTs that you really like. This is one way. And then another way is in your interface, you can also add a curatorial fee. And if you add that curatorial fee, then the artists' wallets, which are added to your curation, if they log in on Joyn, they'll receive a notification to list the piece. And if that listing is sold through your showcase, you will receive the curator fee that you inputted. So it can be primary works, it can be secondary works, it can be works owned by other collectors, it can be new works minted by artists. Artists can mint on Manifold, Foundation, Maker's Place, and then list it directly on Joyn into your showcase.
Yeah, that sounds super, super exciting. And we are getting close to the hour, Alex. So, um, I have one last question, which is something that I mean, it's a tough question, but I like to ask it to all the guests, which is who are your, I would say, the three emerging artists that you're excited about these days?
Oh no. I'm gonna use this opportunity to promote something that sort of like we had a little team working towards. I just reposted. We have People of Tezos auction this evening, which features 26 artists. It's actually a highlight on the object curation page right now. It's 26 artists, emerging, established. I don't know. We're only 2 years in, so I think we're all emerging at this point. But some of them have been around for a very long time. So you have big names there, but you also have names that maybe you have not heard before. The price point to start, it's only 20 tezos. So
Mhm.
there's no hurt in being part of this bidding war for some of them. And I think that's a beautiful showcase. I was browsing the experience in Here and Now, and I was just looking at the collection and object, and I love so many of them because I think art as self-portraits, it's a practice that dates centuries. And I love the fact that we're continuing this tradition up until now, and it's something that connects us with the past and present. And for the artists to capture their essence in the self-portrait is absolutely beautiful. So I think that's my little show moment.
Nice. That's great to hear. Yeah. And Alex, what about the AI portraits? You made some very cool portraits. You use AI. And I mean, you have been around for a while. You also, that's what I mentioned early on, that you created some art. And this series, Alex, what was your experience like putting yourself in the shoes of the artist and the reception that you got from that AI series? What were your thoughts, and is it something that you will probably keep doing in the future? What's the status of the AI portrait series?
It's a very scary question. I'll be honest with you, I was making digital art since I was 12. So I've been experimenting in Photoshop. I've been doing a lot of sort of also traditional collage. I studied photography when I was 14 in the workshop. So art has always been part of my life, and I took it in school. I did IB art, but I was always scared to call myself an artist because to me it was something very sort of like sacred. It felt like you have to starve on the streets and like not have a job, and that's all you do is be an artist. And so to me, I was like, oh my God, I can't call myself an artist. And then in 2020, I started experimenting with minting. So I was minting probably earlier than most sort of artists in the space right now. And I was playing with AI since 2019. So a lot of people don't know that I have a history. I was just
Mhm.
really, really, really shy to talk about it, and I never felt the confidence to call myself an artist. I had a show in Paris at the Bitforms Gallery. I was part of the Trash Art Garbology retrospective. Um, so when I sort of accidentally started doing these things, it happened really suddenly. I was minting on Tezos since like March 2021 as well, but
Mhm.
these portraits, they grabbed attention. So First, I offered them for free. I just wanted people's portraits for people to share their portraits so I can practice. But then there were a lot of them. So I was like, maybe I should mint. And I asked people, like, should I mint these? And 99% said yes. And so I started minting them, and then people were buying them. And I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? And all of a sudden, I catch myself with a list of 50 people DMing me, asking
Fantastic.
me,
I
like,
was one of those.
you were one of them, Art Gnome, Ivana, like everyone was DMing me. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? And so I started making them, and most of the people were extremely supportive. I think only a few were a bit, I don't know. I was surprised that some of my closest people weren't as supportive. They thought that I'm like asking all these famous people if I can draw them, but in reality, I never asked anyone. I was just catching up with all
Yes.
the requests. And so it kind of made me realize, I felt like this space is supposed to be about liberation and everyone being able to be calling themselves an artist. But some people in this space who say they understand it, they didn't realize that this is the freedom we've all been fighting for. For them, it was about like, no, this is still not right. So I'm still sort of like on the fence about like claiming I'm an artist because let's be honest, I spent 10 years building stuff,
Hmm.
but I like the freedom it gives me because it's extremely therapeutic and I was able to connect on a personal level with everyone behind the portraits. We talked about their life, we talked about their story, we worked through different iterations and like Yazid never showed his face before and no one knew that he's actually a banker in real life or like well banker like works in the bank and so I was able to bring to life like all these different people and that has been a joy and I was invited to be exhibited I'm part of a group show later this fall so I'm super
Hmm.
excited. I can't share everything just yet but it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I just missed the show that you will be exhibited at. Where is that? Can you
Oh,
repeat it?
I can't share it just yet. But yeah, it's
Soon,
it's
soon.
going to be soon. Yeah, it's going to
Okay.
be announced soon.
All right. Well, Alex, it has been amazing. Thanks so much for sharing all your knowledge and your path. I think you're one of those that is very well connected in the space and knows what's happening. And I think people will learn a lot from you from all angles that you just describe. And hopefully, I see you again soon in the show, the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting me, and I really appreciate and I see you grow over the years, and I'm really happy to see your sort of like continuing sharing so many interesting stories and information. So thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for everybody that tune in. And remember, if you tune in late, I'll share this through my podcast, so you can find it at Code.xyz and replay all the episodes. So thanks so much, Alex, and talk to you
Thanks.
soon. Bye bye.
Bye.